So why couldn't an advanced technological civilization that evolved to go way past us and then maybe even died off millions of years ago somewhere else? So he's on this search to either find active UAP or the remnants of another technological civilization. When you think about those scales and the fact that, okay, there's life on this Earth, so we know that life can evolve on a planet. It's just myopic to think, why wouldn't it happen somewhere else in this giant universe?
Yeah. You had mentioned just a minute ago that the universe is expanding. And I've been watching things on this, but how do we know it's expanding?
Well, I won't go into the details here, but astronomers can see it in different signatures. I believe Edwin Hubble, I think, was the first astronomer to find evidence of that. And it's based on, it's not necessarily I think it's a thing they call redshift, where a certain spectrum of electromagnetic energy out in the universe has a feature to it like a Doppler shift. When a train's going by or you're going fast by something and you hear that change in frequency, I believe it's something like that. Don't quote me. I haven't done astronomy for a long time, but astronomers have been able to prove it conclusively.
What do you think it's expanding into? Right.
That's exactly it. And where'd it come from? There's this Big Bang that happened 14.6 billion years ago. Nobody knows what happened before that or what was there.
I mean, what does that mean? Does it mean that...
Is it creating space?
Is there a wall?
Yeah, is there an end?
What's on the other side of it?
I don't know. Exactly. And that's why when you think about that weirdness, then you start appreciating that other weirdness could be too, because again, we've only reached our understanding of modern physics in the last 100 years. What if we evolve and live and don't kill ourselves for another 1,000 or million years? What is the state of technology going to be like then? And that's why when we talk about where these things coming from, it could be anything. It could be from other dimensions that we just haven't learned the physics about, or again from another part of the universe that we say, okay, we can't travel that far, that fast based on the known laws of physics and the speed of light, but maybe we'll invent that and discover those physics sometime in the future.
Wow. Man, it's fascinating. There's so much to cover here.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's start with a little bit of your Navy career. So you're an oceanographer in the Navy. What does an oceanographer do? Right.
So I joined the Navy because I wanted to be an oceanographer. It wasn't because I wanted to join the Navy. My dad had been in, and I respected the service, of course, but my passion is in the ocean. And that's really why we're here, because we'll get into the UAP in the ocean later. But I grew up in Southern California. I love to swim and surf, and so I wanted to study the ocean. And so the Naval Academy had a great major, and they had a scholarship to this institution called Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I wanted to go there and get it. I got that, and then I started doing that work in the Navy. And what it involves is basically knowing everything about the physical ocean and predicting it. Waves, currents, how the ocean structure affects acoustic propagation, which is the top consideration in undersea warfare and finding and killing enemy submarines and vice versa, not being killed by an enemy submarine. So that's what oceanographers do for the most part. I worked with your community, Navy Special Warfare, for a time because a lot of work with the steel delivered vehicles, for example, or anything like a special reconnaissance mission from offshore. The ton of work they do is dependent upon the ocean, wave heights, currents, temperature. My SDV buddies would hype out on every mission, and I would never want to do that. My wife was a Navy diver, and it's funny because when I was at the Navy SEAL headquarters, I had a good buddy who had formerly been in the SDV teams, and he knew my wife, and they had these mutual conversations together whenever we had parties or whatnot, because my wife had been a Navy diver and Bruce had been a SDV operator, and they would always just talk about hating to be cold now after all those missions. But anyways, so just helping operators in any field, whether it be surface Navy, submarine, SEALs, know the ocean and predict it so they can plan their missions more effectively.
Then you went on. You were a flag officer at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
What were you doing there?
Well, I was the oceanographer of the Navy. That's the top oceanographer and meteorologist and hydrographer, advising the Chief of Naval Operations on everything that my community of officers did for the Navy. So I was in charge of 6 of our oceanographic ships that are all around the world collecting ocean data and mapping the seafloor. So this is an interesting thing. You see these pictures of the Earth, and sometimes you'll see like Google Earth's ocean features, and you think the seafloor is all mapped. And the fact is it's not. We've not even mapped 25% of the world's seafloor to a modern standard, meaning multi-beam sonar and GPS navigation. That's 75% of the Earth's seafloor is basically uncharted territory. And it's even crazier for the volume of the ocean. Barely 5% of the ocean volume has ever been explored with a remotely operated vehicle.
5%?
5%, yeah. So like that much volume, we don't even know what's out there. So so I did that for the Navy in the Pentagon, and after I left, I did that at this U.S. agency, which was a U.S. top ocean agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And then, since I've left, I'm just consulting for some companies that do that kind of work, ocean tech, weather tech, some other things. Yeah. So there's another thing about this underwater feature off SoCal that I want to dive an ROV on. What happened is I wanted to get a better look at it, and I happen to know this very famous explorer. His name is Victor Vescovo. And here's the kind of guy Victor is. He's a private equity investor. He was an intelligence officer in the Naval Reserve. But he made a lot of money in his day job. And he has done the Explorers Club Grand Slam, which involves hiking all the 7 peaks, including Everest, and skiing to the North Pole and the South Pole. And Victor, for him, it wasn't enough. So he learned that all the deep ocean trenches in the world, not all of them have been explored. So he hired a company, bought a ship, built his own submersible, and financed, for the sum of about $50 million, an expedition to dive in all the 5 deep trenches. And it's called the 5 Deeps. None of them, that's never happened. So he built a submersible that could go all the way down to the Marianas Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. They call it Challenger Deep. And he's done that 14 times, which is incredible. That only been dove twice before.
How deep is it?
35,000 feet.
Wow.
10,000 plus meters. Yeah, this is crazy. And so he's done some exploring. What happened is I signed an agreement with him when I was at NOAA, and he agreed to put our scientists on his ship and give us the data he collected, because he also had a really great sonar, a multi-beam bathymetry sonar. And so we had that agreement. Well, one time after I left the government, I learned that he was going to do a test cruise, if you will, a shakedown for his ship, because he got a new sonar on it, the state of the art. And when I learned he was doing it, and I knew about this one feature that I couldn't explain on the seafloor, I wrote Victor and I said, hey, this cruise you're going to go test your sonar at, I have an idea for you, and it's going to be an expedition like no other. And I told him about what I was doing with UAP and my hypothesis on this feature maybe being the result of some interaction with a USO in the seabed. And I said, and I have some other coordinates too. And we gave him some coordinates of areas like where we knew the Nimitz had its encounter, and the Omaha had its encounter. Just areas where UAP had been observed and USOs, and that maybe there's something on the seabed there. And I didn't think he'd write me back. I was curious. I thought he might think I was off my rocker. Well, he wrote me back and just said, send me the coordinates. And he went and surveyed all around those areas. Unfortunately, his submersible wasn't ready, and he couldn't get his eyes on that target and see it optically. But he got some high-resolution bathymetry with the sonar, and that's what I'm working off of.
Well, how long ago did this happen?
Oh, it might have been 2 years, but that's what's interesting about my point too is this, that here is a guy like him, and I told him about possible UAP activity in the ocean, and he didn't blink. He just said, send me the coordinates. I have one other story, and it relates to this, the ocean, and I guess maybe the credibility of the topic. So I mentioned that I work with the National Academies, and the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And they have this body on it called the Ocean Studies Board. And this is the Hall of Fame, or the all-stars of ocean science in our nation. These are just top-tier ocean scientists who get together and we decide upon topics of interest on the ocean, and we agree on studies and help conduct them. And things like the illegal fishing issue I talked about, ocean plastics, you name it. Well, I went to them and I pulled together all my info about what Congress had done, the DoD is doing, and NASA has a study team, and I recommended that we get together and do a survey of all the government data sets, ocean data sets, and just look for anomalous activity and see if there are areas where we know it occurs and that just haven't been looked at, because remember I mentioned it's not necessarily the topic or target of most ocean research expeditions. So maybe it's in the data and no one even thought about calling it out. Well, I wasn't sure what they'd say, and they did not laugh me out of the room. They actually said, "Wow, that's interesting, Tim. Maybe you should look into it, but you probably want to include all the classified data sources too, and we don't do that. The group that does that at the academies is the Naval Studies Board." Ah, okay. So that was great, because that was familiar territory for me, because I briefed the Naval Studies Board multiple times on different issues, the Naval Studies Board. And so I went to the chair, who happens to be retired 4-star Admiral Gary Roughead, former Chief of Naval Operations when I was in the Pentagon as a 1-star, and my boss. So I knew him, or pardon me, I was a captain at the time. So he's my boss's boss, and I've briefed him before. So I go to him and I say, we have a Zoom meeting. I tell him about all this UAP research that's going on by credible institutions and the government. And he thought, "Tim, that is something we should be doing." He said, not only because if we have things in our water space that we don't know about, we should. And he said, but also, this is going to help us know a lot more about the ocean. And I remember I talked about knowing more about the ocean is going to help us with China. And he said, we need to know more about the ocean for that very reason, to be better than them. So two purposes he thought we could achieve with that. So where I am with this is that now I have to, they need government funding. They need a government sponsor to say, hey, Naval Studies Board, do this for us, and we'll pay you this much. And so I now have to go back to the government, unfortunately, either the Office of Naval Intelligence, my former command, the Naval Oceanographic Office that I was in charge of, or NOAA, and see if they'll want to do a study. I asked NOAA, and they already said, no, we have too many other things on our plate, not interested. I don't see the DoD or Office of Naval Intelligence doing the same, again, because of the non-disclosure policy currently that exists in the executive branch, but I'm still gonna ask and still gonna try.
Well, I can't wait to see what you come up with.
We'll see what happens.
What was it how did you get involved in this whole UFO, UAP thing? Right.
So I've said this story before, but it's worth going at again. First off, as I mentioned, I was a superintendent of the Naval Observatory, so I understood how big the universe was, and I was open-minded to that there could be other life outside of the Earth. And then, as a 1-star, I had actually 2 jobs. I had a Pentagon job, and then I also was an operational commander. So there's a 1-star job in Stennis Space Center, Mississippi, called the Commander of the Navy Meteorology and Oceanography Command. And that's all the folks that did what I did. So there's enlisted aerographers that do weather forecasting on aircraft carriers and shore stations. And there's other folks that, again, advise for anti-submarine warfare. And so all these, about 3,000 people, civilians and uniformed, do things like ocean mapping, weather forecasting, ocean forecasting, and I was in charge of them all. And so I'm in my office that one day, so I was splitting time between the Pentagon and D.C. and this office in Stennis. And one day I get this email on the Navy Secret Network, SIPRNet, and it's from my boss's operation officer. I was reporting to a 4-star admiral, U.S. Fleet Forces Command. His operations officer was a 2-star. And the email was sent to all the subordinate commanders. This is at least 20 flags and SESs. All the deputies are copied on it. And the title of it is Urgent Safety of Flight Issue, all caps. And the body of the email said, if any of you know what these are, tell me ASAP. We are having numerous near midair collisions, and if we don't stop it, we're going to have to cancel the exercise. And attached to the video was the now famous leaked Go Fast video. You know it, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the UAP, F-18 pilots captured video of this UAP zorching over the water. There's no flight control surfaces or propulsion means that are visible. It's just a little round sphere. And then the pilots are all going crazy, and other videos have mentioned how there were multiple ones out there. And I knew right then and there that was not ours. We don't have technology like that. I was read into a lot of SAPs, to the best of my knowledge, and we would never do that in a training range. Especially aircraft carrier workups are so compressed. They have to do all these things. The pilot's got to get certified. They got to land so many times on the carrier. They got to do all these things and certify to go deploy. So throwing out advanced technology in a training range during a pre-deployment workup just doesn't happen. I mean, people will get fired. So, and of course, we have testing ranges to do that. That's of course. So I knew that wasn't ours. I also have been read in all the threat, our adversaries' capabilities. I knew nobody else had that. And so I knew right there that was something not ours, not human, off-world, whatever. It just wasn't ours. And my deputy and I were both open-minded. He was an SES, and I pulled him over, and we've talked about it for a while, and we're just pretty much amazed. But the next day, that email was wiped from my computer and my deputies and everybody else. So, okay, it's gone. Wow, I wanted to save that thing. It was interesting. And come to find out, I go to monthly meetings at my boss's headquarters in Norfolk. And we always talk about, staying up with the training cycle, and safety issues always came up. And this was a big safety issue. The ops officer said so. And so, and my job as the chief meteorologist in the Navy, another one of my hats, was safety of flight. And so we get into the next monthly meeting, and no one brings this stuff up. No one's talking about a safety issue almost canceling this major training event. And then you come to find out one of the pilots flying during those missions, that video was from the USS Theodore Roosevelt's Air Wing. It was Ryan Graves. He's pretty well known now as somebody who's come out, and he's founded an organization I'm on the board of called the Americans for Safe Aerospace, and he's advocating for, with draft legislation out there, to instill reporting protocols for pilots in the FAA, commercial pilots and others by the FAA, because currently there and pretty much the Navy, if you come out and say, hey, I saw these things, it could be a career killer.
Yeah.
And I'll just, one more point about that. So I couldn't say anything at the time. And by the way, so it was wiped from my computer. I had been read into SAPs, and I knew, okay, this probably was connected to a SAP that the ops officer did not know. And the intelligence officer, one of the intelligence officers probably found that email and said, oh, shoot, and contacted whoever owned it, which was probably DIA. And they did their forensics and took everything off the system. Whoever it was, I don't know. But I had been read into enough SAPs to know, that probably happened, and that's why I didn't have it, and that's why no one's talking about it. But it bothered me, Shawn, because and now that I talk with Ryan, I realize, holy cow, lots of these things were in the airspace. They were interfering with operations, and they were a safety issue.
How many?
I don't know how many, but there were. At one of the gimbal recording, it was another one from that period, and you can hear one of the pilots say, "There's a whole fleet of them." So I don't know, but there were a lot, and the pilots were seeing them all the time. And what gets me is that commanders like me, once admirals, who are in charge of the well-being, responsible for the well-being and safety of their people and their forces, they were basically forced to turn a blind eye because of some overclassification issue and make the pilots mitigate the safety threat on their own, which is feckless to me. We should be stepping up as flags, as leaders, and saying, all right, let's address this here. Let's talk about it at the 4-star meeting and make sure we don't have to cancel exercise or see pilots fall out of the sky because of interactions with these things or avoidance maneuvers that again. So that's why I've come out and been an advocate for what Ryan's doing.
Nobody brought up that email?
No. No. Well, and that's the thing, is that we all knew, okay, someone just touched a sap and they got rid of it and we can't talk about it. Think about that. So we could have had planes falling out of the sky, but we're not going to talk about it because of this overclassification, that's what's, there's a lot of unethical aspects, I think, of this whole UAP system that exists right now in the government.